Why are all these people fighting about the British Bigfoot?
It's because people can't agree whether there's something flesh and blood or something paranormal.
Surely no one can believe there's an unknown species of ape in Britain.
You'd like to think so, wouldn't you? But let's go and find out.
What's that?
I don't know, but I think it's time to ask a real expert. Evelyn, what do you think it is?
It's Carby and Silicon, Dad.
Yes, of course, Evelyn's right. It's our old friend Carl Marshall being silly. But enough of that for later. My name's Jon and welcome to another episode of On the Track.
Last month I said we had some exciting news, which we couldn't reveal, but now we can finally tell you. Let's start at the beginning. There's a new video game out called Monster Hunter World, and the people who made it, Capcom, asked us to help publicise it. So Graham, Jon and I met a group of journalists in a nice old pub called the Hoops Inn, here in North Devon, to explain how monsters and mystery animals are not just found in video games.
If you look, it looks like the skull. It looks like the skull of a prehistoric reptile, a dinosaur or something, but it's actually nothing of the sort. Graham, turn it over please, mate. That is not the bottom jaw. It's actually the top jaw. And there would have been, in life, would have been a bloody great what's called a melon coming up over there, which is its echolocation, and there have been teeth coming out of here. It's the skull of a slightly deformed pilot whale. And if you read all the books on mystery animals that were published before 1996, they say there was a creature washed up and nobody could identify it. And the skull mysteriously disappeared under mysterious circumstances, mysteriously. Well, it wasn't that mysterious. It was in my loft for about 15 years, and before that it was in my old lady's garden, and she had pots in the mussel holes here that used to hold geraniums. So it's actually quite an object lesson that even the most mysterious mysteries are quite often something prosaic behind them.
But we didn't sit in the pub all day. We took the journalists and the Capcom people into the wild woods, to a place where there have been many alleged sightings of big cats over the last few years. I've never dealt with the press before, and it felt strange standing there with people pointing loads of cameras at us.
I'm trying not to laugh.
Because Jon is confined to a wheelchair, it was down to Graham and me to do the more energetic bits. We showed the journalists how to do things, like looking for hair and setting sand traps. I'm glad to tell you they found several bits of interesting hair samples, and the sand trap got loads of footprints, mostly dog, but at least one fox as well. But it was the next day, at Cornwall, a mile or so to the east, that things got really exciting. Mike, from the PR company, found a skeleton. It appeared to be from sheep, although it might have been from a deer, and there were not any obvious signs that it had been hit by a car or butchered by a human. Everyone was very excited and bustled around to get pictures for the newspapers. I bagged most of the body up and took it home. I bet I'm the only teenage girl who gets excited by dead body parts. And then I spent the weekend examining the bones on our kitchen table, and yes, there are very definite teeth marks. A week or so later, Jon and Graham went to London.
When I was a boy and even as a young man, I quite enjoyed going to London. but these days it terrifies me. I believe it was Samuel Johnson who once said that the man who is tired of London is tired of life. Well, if the CFZ ever gets a time machine, I'm going back to the 18th century and I'm going to smack him in the mouth. The point of the London trip was for me to spend a day in the studios doing a whole string of interviews about Capcom, Monster Hunter World, the CFZ and cryptozoology in general. As you already know, I don't like travelling, especially to London, and I don't like cities in general. But once I got in the studio, I began to enjoy myself. And it must be weird that the idea of sitting in the studio for 6 hours, having people bring me coffee and pastries while I talk about a subject that fascinates me, is my idea of fun.
Morning to you. Right, okay, so we asked you at the start of this programme, do you believe in monsters? Now, I'm not talking about the monsters under the bed that we've all probably been afraid of at one point as children, or our children are going through that. What I'm talking about things like, the Yeti, Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster. Maybe you've seen something on your travels that does resemble things like that. I know I have on several occasions, but that's usually on a Saturday night. Anyway, one man who has dedicated his life to this is Jon Downes. He is a cryptozoologist. I had no idea what that was, or that even existed. Jon, good morning to you.
Good morning, my dear. How are you?
Oh, all the better for talking to you. Cryptozoology, what is it?
Very simply, it comes from the Greek word kryptos, meaning hidden, and zoology, the study of animals. It's the study of unexpected or hidden or mystery animals.
Where did your fascination start with monsters?
Well, it was when I was about 8 years old, so we're talking about half a century ago in Hong Kong, which is where I was brought up, when I read a book which my mother had got me, which introduced me to the idea that there were people believed there were monsters in lakes and big hairy men up in the Himalayas and stuff like that. And it was one of the great epiphanies of my life. The other two being when I discovered that girls were different than boys, and when I discovered that I really liked Led Zeppelin. So those are the three epiphanies in my life. And basically I've been looking for mystery animals ever since. And that's why I'm so pleased to be involved in this game Monster Hunter, which comes from those jolly nice guys at Capcom. And Capcom are offering a £50,000 reward for conclusive evidence for one of 10 different monsters, and I'm going to be judging this. I've already had my stepdaughter try to dress up my granddaughter as Bigfoot, but I knew it was
That's not going to cut it.
It doesn't, because the video on YouTube she sent me goes, "All right, Grandad, I'm Bigfoot." And I went back and said, "No, you're not, I still love you." But we're going to be looking at the evidence, and on the 30th of June we're going to announce the winner.
So you have basically been a monster hunter then for all your life?
Well, yeah, I've been doing it for 50 years, been doing it 30 years professionally, and this is what I do. I run the world's biggest cryptozoological research organisation, which is the Centre for Fortean Zoology, which is www.cfz.org.uk. We do a monthly newsletter, we do a daily blog, we do a quarterly magazine and an annual peer-reviewed journal and a monthly webTV show.
So, Jon, at what point were you you're convinced that are you convinced that things like Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster exist?
It depends on your definition. Do I believe that
Okay, Loch Ness Monster.
Okay, yeah. Do I believe there's a prehistoric reptile living in Scotland's longest lake? No, of course I don't. For one thing, well, for lots of reasons, one of them being, in the last ice age, it was frozen solid. So which really means there cannot be an ancient creature living there. Do I believe that there is something that people are seeing there which they're interpreting as a prehistoric monster? Yes. And I think it's probably a giant eel, because eels are weird creatures. Usually when they reach sexual maturity they swim down the Sargasso Sea, make spawn and die. But there's something wrong with them. If they're sterile, for example, they'll stay in fresh water and carry on getting longer and longer and longer. And having been bitten by an 18-inch eel while I was a boy, and I still got the scar, the idea of a 12 or 15-foot eel in Loch Ness, and we've got a lot of evidence for that, is pretty far out. And so the great game continued. People asked me questions, I answered them. They were mostly the same questions, but I did my best to be entertaining and interesting each time. I drank enormous amounts of coffee. I had to be wheeled out in my wheelchair for a pee after having drunk the first gallon. But then I went back in and drank some more. And eventually Graham and I had finished. And it was back to Paddington Station and our return journey to Vaudrey. Now, if you'll excuse me for being non-linear here, but sometimes when you're telling a story, it's the only way to do it. A week or so before our trip to London, Carl Marshall had been down with us, and he and Graham had gone out and set up camera traps at the place where the skeleton had been found.
Okay, going by what I'm assuming is eyewitness reports from the area, there's obviously something about. There's a nice water source that runs parallel with the road, so obviously it's going to have a drink. It does seem like it's across an area. I would say if it's not a cat, a deer or something is definitely using it, and hopefully we'll get something.
Righty-ho, okay, let's leave the camera to get on with it then.
And now we're going all non-linear on you again. Back when Charlotte was examining the bones of the skeleton from Common Moor, on her family's kitchen table she took a load of photographs for Lars. Lars wrote back and asked for some more specific photographs and measurements, which Charlotte duly sent. Then Lars sent me an instant message and dropped a bombshell. First, the carcass was of a deer, a female roe deer to be precise. Secondly, it was quite a small specimen for a deer. Thirdly, by measuring the distance between the teeth which caused the main puncture wounds, Lars said that in his opinion it was almost certainly the victim of a canid, which would mean in this country a dog or a fox. And are we disappointed? No, not really, because it's the job of the CFZ to solve mysteries and to put the results out into the public domain, and in doing so to try to dispel the culture of superstition and fear which surrounds so many mystery animal sightings.
And we all know a song about that, don't we, boys and girls?
Doe, a deer, a female deer. Charlotte put its skeleton in a box. Lars looked at the photographs and said it was probably killed by a fox. Or possibly it was a dog, a canid because of its teeth. Now we know why it was dead, which is the job of the CFZ. All together now!
All right, that's enough of this rubbish. What about British Bigfoot?
Do I believe in the British Bigfoot? Well, it depends on what you're talking about. Do I believe that there is one or more species of bona fide flesh and blood higher primates awaiting discovery in the forests of Britain? No, of course I don't. But do I believe that people see something which very much appears to be a man-beast in some of the wilder and not so wilder parts of the country? Yes, I do, because in January 2003 I saw one. In December 2002 there was a whole spate of sightings from all across the country, but in particularly from a location in Sussex, from a location in Sherwood Forest, and from a place called Bolam Lake, which is about 40 miles north of Newcastle. Now, I didn't believe any of it, but I had been given a tip-off that there was a journalist from one of the nastier and sleazier of the tabloid newspapers up there in a monkey suit jumping out at people to scare them and to be able to manufacture a story. So I decided to get the CFZ Expeditionary Force, which at the time was me, Graham, Richard, John Fuller and Davy Curtis, to all get together. We all drove up to the frozen north, and we went to a place called Seaham-on-Sea, where we stayed in a house that Davy owned, and we went out to Bolam Lake to see if we could find what was happening. But we took with us a paintball gun, because what we intended to do was catch the newspaper journalist, splatter him with paint, hog-tie him, and take him down and dump him on the front doorstep of one of their rival nasty tabloid newspaper, and probably pick up a few £100 for having done so. We thought it was a funny thing to do, but then of course we were young and innocent then. It was 15 years ago. So we went to Bolam Lake and we started to interview various people who'd seen this thing, and it soon became obvious that what they'd seen was not a man in a monkey suit, and that these people believed totally and entirely in what they were telling us. I'd been contacted by the BBC Radio 4 Today programme, and they wanted to do a feature about our hunt for the beast of Bolam. So, at a horribly early hour on our second day, I was picked up by a chauffeured limo and taken all the way to Bolam Lake before dawn. And as I was there, we liaised with the BBC reporter, and as he was setting up his equipment, I could hear these peculiar booming sounds coming out of the forest. They were like nothing that I'd ever heard. And then, bizarrely, about 3 years ago, when I saw a Bigfoot documentary, I realised they sounded like a very amplified version of the tree-knocking sounds which Bigfoot researchers report coming out of forests in places where there are allegedly Sasquatch. We spent the day there doing various exercises and trying to map the area where people had seen these things. And then, as the sun was going down, we prepared to pack up. At the time I was still driving my old Jaguar XJ6, and 3 of us were sat on the bonnet of the Jaguar. Graham had got the engine running and the lights on. And suddenly there were 5 of us, 3 on the bonnet and 2 standing, and 3 of us saw something utterly extraordinary. A very tall, spindly thin stick figure, jet black, looking more like a 2-dimensional character than a 3-dimensional character, suddenly ran from right to left across an area between 2 dead trees, and then a second or so later ran back from left to right. So do I believe in the British Bigfoot? Yes, of course I do. But do I believe it's a flesh and blood animal? No. The thing I saw could not be explained within purely zoological frames of reference, and there is no evidence that anybody has ever presented me which makes me think that any of the other sightings of so-called Bigfoot-like creatures in the United Kingdom could be flesh and blood animals either. Now, before we go any further, I want to make absolutely certain that everybody listening to this realises that I am not accusing anybody of fraud. I truly believe that the people who have reported seeing Bigfoot-like creatures in the United Kingdom are 100% genuine. The fact that I don't believe they are flesh and blood in nature no way belittles these sightings or the credibility of the witnesses. Now I want to introduce you to somebody. Glen Vaudrey is an old friend and colleague of mine, and recently I asked him to take over running the CFZ BHM study group. The group was started in 2002 under the leadership of Paul Vella, but as Paul Vella's health deteriorated in the last few years, he had to give it up, and as I'm afraid you all know, he died last summer. So I've asked Glen to take over from him, and assisting him will be our friend Colin Scneider, who most people know from his regular appearances on this show. Now, Glen has been in a spot of bother recently, and I really don't understand why. I don't understand why people get so protective or antagonistic when people suggest that their interpretation of events may be mistaken. As I've said, I believe in the British Bigfoot as a zooform phenomenon, and so does Glen. However, both of us have publicly stated that we don't think that it could be a flesh and blood bona fide unknown species of primate, and I ended up getting death threats, and Glen has made himself one of the most unpopular people in a certain sector of the internet because of this. Now, I think this is silly. The CFZ is a place for open and frank discussion, but it is also a place where people are supposed to, and as far as I'm concerned, are damn well going to, behave in a civilised manner. Racism, sexism, or pejorative comments about someone's sexual orientation are strictly forbidden. I would like to say here and now that I completely support Glen in what he has been doing, and that I hope that in the future anybody who discusses these matters, or any other matters, and CFZ fora will do so in a civilised manner. But now to change the subject slightly, we're still with Glen Vaudrey, but now we're going to talk about the Weird Weekend North.
The Weird Weekend North is a great weekend for anyone interested in ghosts, Forteana, fairies, UFOs, folklore, cryptozoology, and other fascinating stuff. Located on the border of Cheshire and Greater Manchester, in the village of Victor Glazebrook, just 14 miles from Manchester and 30 miles away from Liverpool. Easy to get to, close to motorway links and other transport links. It's a 2-day event at the rather bargain price of just £30 for the 2 days.
This year's event features Anne Winsper, Ben Emlyn Jones, Steve Mera, James Newton, Richard Freeman, Steve Jones, Lee Walker, Rob Gandy, Steve Mera, Bob Fisher, Glen Vaudrey and Nathan Jackson. You can get more information on the Weird Weekend North Facebook page. Check it out, guys. And whilst we're in product placement mode, I'd like to tell you all about a regular podcast done by our friend Mark Rains. It's generally Fortean in nature and great fun to listen to. Check it out, guys. But now it's time to go over to our friend and colleague Colin in Ohio.
Hi everyone, it's Colin from Ohio, and for this episode of On the Track, I'm going to talk about 5 books I think every upcoming cryptozoologist should read or at least have access to. This is partially due to the official launching of the Next Generation initiative with the CFC. I'm really excited about it, and I hope any of the young... I'll talk about it at the end. But first, let's talk about the 5 books I think every cryptozoologist should read or at least have access to. The first one, On the Track of Unknown Animals by Bernard Heuvelmans. This is kind of a given. You ask nearly anyone in the field of cryptozoology what they think the top book in the field is, and they'll say this one. Heuvelmans is widely considered to be the father of cryptozoology. He is the guy that made it what it is today and really just kind of pushed the idea that there are new species out there. It's a massive book. It's like 500 pages long, and it covers a lot of obscure stuff that not a lot of books talk about today within cryptozoology. It doesn't talk about Bigfoot. I think it mentions Loch Ness, but not very in-depth. But it goes over stuff like the Aren Pendek, or the... it does talk about the abominable snowman, or Yeti. It talks about the Queensland tiger, the bunyip in Australia, the possible survival of the moa, various apes that were described in South America. There's a lot of stuff in here that is fairly obscure and not really talked about today that's really worth learning about. I mean, just the whole first section about Hooverman's philosophy on zoology and some of the discoveries. I think, honestly, I don't think anyone would disagree with me when I say that everybody in the field of cryptozoology has to at least have read this once. Incredibly important book. Another book, kind of similar to Hooverman's, is Cryptozoology, Science and Speculation by Chad Arment. Now, this is a fairly obscure book. It was published by Coach Whip Publications, which Arment himself runs. And it's a very local publishing company. They're slowly getting bigger. Carl Schuker does a lot of his books through it. Excuse me. But this book, I think, is really important because it changes the way cryptozoology should be looked at least in my opinion. Arment brings up a lot of good points about how cryptozoology doesn't just have to be zoological, or at least it doesn't. He feels that it can be even better if you understand that 99% of these creatures are from folklore, and they definitely are. Even creatures like Bigfoot, where the contemporary sightings started in the 20s. It's folklore. And in the book, Arment lays out a really interesting methodology for understanding and accepting these things as folklore and being able to, instead of proving that Bigfoot exists, trying to figure out and solve the mystery of what's causing these sightings. And I think that's a much more interesting and much more important point of view for any cryptozoologist. I highly, highly recommend the book. He also delves into a lot of stuff like problems with some of the logic and arguments with a lot of people in the field. He calls the foundation of zoology ethnozoological, which is really focused on, like I said, the creatures within folklore and what might have caused them. Then he goes into some really interesting, more obscure creatures as well. Long-tailed wildcats, which are like bobcats and lynxes, but they have longer tails, obviously. Giant orangutans in America. He has an extremely long chapter on the Pennsylvanian gorilla. Naked bears, and then merfolk and sea monkeys. So there's a lot of weird stuff in here, a lot of interesting stuff, and I can't say enough good things about this. This book, honestly, is one of the books that changed the way I look at things in cryptozoology. Next is Alien Animals by Colin and Janet Board. This book is very much focused, it was written in the 80s, so most of the stories are from the 70s or before, but the 70s were a really weird time for cryptozoology, and I think that there are a lot of books that reflect that, like a lot of Keel's work, but I've criticized Keel a lot for the way he wrote and just the fact that he didn't cite his sources. But Colin and Janet Board do excellently. They go by kind of different types of creatures. It's pretty basic. Lake monsters, mystery cats, mystery dogs, giant birds, and flying humanoids, and then Bigfoot-like creatures. And what's really interesting is there's a lot of weird stories in here, especially with like the Bigfoot chapter where they talk about the UFO connections and some of the weirder things, the more esoteric aspects of some of these creatures. It's a really good book, whether or not you agree with some of the theories that they put out or some of the ways they look at things. It's a really good book and an excellent source for stories. I mean, it's just jam-packed. It can be a little difficult to find, but I think it's well worth it. And it's meticulously cited as well, which is excellent. Next, Flying Toad, From Flying Toads to Snakes with Wings by Carl Schuker. Now, Schuker's done a lot in cryptozoology, but in my opinion, this is one of his best books, and definitely an excellent book to get when you're first starting out. It goes over a lot of like the weirder stuff, but I think what's more important with this book is the way he looks at it and the way he analyzes these stories. It's kind of difficult to describe. It's just it's very zoological focused and focused on how plausible these things are, and not automatically taking what the witnesses are saying as gospel. It's got a lot of weird stuff as well. As you can tell, I like the more obscure things better than the, just a catalog of Bigfoot stories. While Bigfoot's important, obviously, I think some of these are a bit more exciting and significant. And some of them have a better possibility of existing, in my opinion. It goes over monster sharks, mystery bears, blood-sucking water vampire from Scotland, obviously flying toads and snakes with wings, dragons, possibility that the dodo is still around, mystery whales, which is really interesting. It's actually a pretty big subject, just nobody talks about it very often. So there's a lot of neat stuff in here, and it's all very concise. Shuker's got a lot of books like this, but this one's my favorite, and I think that it's a good example of some of the things you can do with research in cryptozoology other than just going out in the field and, taking a stick and whacking on some trees and howling. I think it's really important to consider the folklore aspects and the historical aspects, and Shuker definitely does. Finally, my absolute favorite resources of my library, Mysterious Creatures, Guide to Cryptozoology. Massive books. There's a lot of cryptozoological encyclopedias like Cryptozoology A to Z and Encyclopedia of Cryptozoology by Michael Newton, but I think this set, it's 2 volumes, by George M. Eberhardt is definitely the best. It's the longest, the most extensive, and the most worldwide. The others have a lot of focus on creatures in the western part of the world, the English-speaking part of the world, but these 2 volumes are incredibly worldwide. It's just insane. Every time I flip through these, there's stuff that I'm just learning about now, that I had never heard of. It's the book's split up alphabetically, and it works in a type of field guide format. Gives the entry, gives a little description, then goes into the origin of the name, the variant names of the creature, what they're described as, their behavior, if they leave tracks, where they're located, significant sightings, possible explanations associated with the creature, if they have a habitat associated with them. There's just so much in this book. It's just amazing. I think that these 2 should be on every cryptozoologist shelf, without a doubt. And what's really cool is the CFC republished them, because the original volumes are pretty rare. They're out of print, but they're worth a lot. They're like $300 for the set. But the CFC has paperback copies with, in my opinion, better illustrations. They're slightly different than the originals, but they're in my opinion better in just their variety and the different pictures that are used. You can get that at the CFC shop, and they're like $25 a piece, which they're really pretty big books, and I cannot say enough good things about these as well. So there you have it. If you're a starting cryptozoologist and you're looking for some books to learn about the subject and really get into what it is and what it isn't, those are the 5 books I recommend. Also, one more book that I think that everyone should read, not just starting out, is Tracking the Chupacabra by Ben Radford. I don't actually have a copy, but I've read it several times, and I highly, highly, highly recommend it. I think that Ben's work with that book, basically solving the Chupacabra mystery, is phenomenal. And it doesn't just work as kind of pointing out what Chupacabra is and what it isn't, and talking about the history and what it conclusively what it is, whether the solution to the problem. But it also works as kind of like a guide to how you should investigate things within cryptozoology. And I think it's something that all cryptozoologists should read and have access to, because it does everything right. And I think that a lot of people in the field could learn from some of the things that Ben does. I mentioned the NGI, the Next Generation Initiative. So we're official. We have a Facebook group now. So if you're interested in joining and learning about what you should do and shouldn't do for cryptozoology and asking questions and just being part of this community, check out the Facebook group. If you just search CFC, Next Generation Initiative, it should pop right up. We also have a blog that's linked in the group. I don't remember the URL at this very moment, but it shouldn't be too hard to find if you do even if you Google Center for Fortean Zoology, Next Generation Initiative. So that's all for this month. I know I said I was going to talk about Eastern Cougar this month, but the NGI got launched and I wanted to talk about this stuff instead. Excuse me. So if I get a chance, I'm probably going to talk about that next month then. So tune in next month. Back to you, John.
And now it's time to go over to my lovely wife, Karina, and our monthly visit to the Watcher of the Skies.
I have always felt a curious affinity with this species of bird, probably because for 30 years I was a secretary, and this is a secretary bird. A highly specialised ground-dwelling bird of prey from an older family than the other Old World raptors. It is native to sub-Saharan Africa and is sadly non-migratory, so will never be a natural visitor to these shores. But I think you'd be surprised quite how many completely unexpected avian visitors Britain does have, and that's what this segment of On the Track is all about. Bernard Heuvelmans himself said that cryptozoology wasn't the study of monsters, but the study of unexpected animals, and in the UK what could be more unexpected than vultures, spoonbills and albatrosses? Yes, even the kings of the Southern Ocean have been seen in British waters. 2 species of albatross have been recorded in the UK in recent years. Not all of our feathered visitors are quite so spectacular, but nearly every day there is something exciting to greet the Watcher of the Skies.
Greetings everybody, and for this issue, poor Charlotte is ill in bed, so we have a different cue card holder, which is Carl. Right, and excuse the cat. Okay, Archie, thank you. Right, a bird called Noddy has had tests carried out by wildlife experts after it was taken in by wildlife rescue in Shropshire during November after having been living in Shrewsbury's Dingle for around 7 months. When fish stocks appeared to plummet because of the winter, he was taken into the centre where he has been recovering. After a DNA test was carried out, it was confirmed that he is an American black-crowned night heron. There's a tail. He is clearly a rare sight over here in the UK, although a pair was seen with 2 juveniles in Somerset last year, which in itself was the first proven breeding record of one of these night herons here in the wild. Night herons usually migrate to warmer countries in August, and experts believe Noddy was likely to be heading to either Spain, France or Africa, but decided instead from Shrewsbury. It is thought he might have been blown off course during his travels. Noddy will be assessed before a decision is made on whether to release him back into the wild or not. Oh, yes, I do a kind of, I gesticulate with my head.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
I think you ought to explain what that noise in the background is as well.
Is it still recording? Oh, okay. Just in case anybody's wondering what the strange noise is in the background, it's the crow getting in on the act. Cue card holder is having trouble with the paper.
Come back, Charlotte.
A group of 5 adult Magellanic penguins set up home on Felixstowe Beach during January.
the first to ever settle naturally in the UK. They were spotted on the pebbled beach close to the Spa Pavilion. I think they were probably there because they were hoping to catch a bit of live music from the aforementioned pavilion, just in order to emulate those wonderful cartoon penguins in Mary Poppins. But anyway, these penguins normally live in South America, and it piqued interest as to how they came to be splashing around on the Suffolk coast. It is thought likely that they hitched a ride on a container ship from the Falkland Islands to Felixstowe Port, which arrived the week before they were actually sighted. Zoologist William Spence from Cambridge University said, "It's certainly nice and cold at the moment, so they are quite at home in the conditions and are likely to be finding plenty to eat in the North Sea." He added that while he and his team were not concerned for the penguins' welfare at the moment, they would struggle in the heat of a Suffolk summer. "We will monitor the situation," he said, "but it may be that they migrate north, where they will enjoy the colder climate." In an extraordinary twist, US President Donald Trump tweeted about this story, claiming it was proof that global warming is a myth.
Eh? That makes no sense at all, Corinne.
That's what it said in the editorial there.
No, I'm not saying the editorial was wrong, I just mean Mr. President is talking bollocks.
Oh, really? Good grief. A number of rare African birds have left the warmer climes to take up residence in Ireland's deepest, dankest, low-lying bogs. 3 glossy ibises, normally found in North Africa, have moved to a bog in County Westmeath, and another has been spotted at a bog in County Offaly. There have been reports of a number of other sightings of rare birds, including a white-tailed eagle on Irish bogs in the last few weeks. The white-tailed eagle was in fact reintroduced from County Kerry a few years ago, but has so far been rarely seen out in the Midlands bogs. It is understood the birds arrive in Ireland having been blown off course, and one theory as to why they have been spotted more often in northern European countries is due to climate change. Drier conditions in France, Spain and Portugal are pushing them northwards. And considering we are actually recording this part of this episode on the 14th of February, what better way to end than with a nice little tale for Valentine's Day? Oh, be still my beating heart. In the last episode of On the Track, we told you about 26-year-old Berwick swan Croupier, arriving back in Britain alone 6 weeks after apparently losing his long-time mate Dealer during the 2,500-mile journey it took to reach Slimbridge Wildfowl and Wetland Trust. The pair had been together for 19 years and are part of a lineage of swans which can be traced back decades. It had been feared that Dealer had not successfully made the journey back from Russia, maybe even having been shot or poisoned. However, after 6 weeks missing, she at last turned up, reuniting with Croupier. WWT's swan expert, Julia Newth, said, during the 19 years they were together, Croupier and Dealer reared and brought back to Slimbridge 29 cygnets. The cygnets learned the 2,500-mile migration route when following their parents, and we often see different generations of the same family on Swan Lake at the same time. Few families have demonstrated these birds' characteristic Sorry, the cat's distracting me behind me. Few families have demonstrated these birds' characteristic sight fidelity and loyalties to each other, and we hope to see them continue to winter at Slimbridge for many years to come. And that, my dear fine feathered friends, is it for this episode. And now we go over to Jonathan for the usual look at new and rediscovered species. Bye bye, and goodbye from our guest cue card reader.
Until recently, the genus Cynomops comprised of 6 species of fast-flying aerial insectivorous bats distributed throughout the neotropics. However, a new revisionary study has shown that the diversity of this taxon was underestimated. New molecular and morphological data supports the recognition of C. malari as a full species and reveals 2 previously unrecognized small species of cynomops. These newly recognized taxa are Cynomops freemani from the Canal Zone region Panama and Cynomops tongiqui from the eastern Andes of Ecuador and Colombia. A new salamander belonging to the genus Neotriton is described from the Caribbean slopes of the southern Cordillera de Talamanca in Costa Rica within Parque Internacional de Amistad at an elevation of about 1,500 meters. This new taxon is distinguished from its congeners by its morphological characteristics and by its differentiation in DNA sequences. A new species of nemalachid fish, Oxyona malachia sexaki, is described from the Sultan Marsh, Kayseri province, Turkey. The species differs from its congeners in the combination of the following characters. The flank is yellowish-brown and pale grey, with irregular spots. Cheeks have numerous tiny spots. It's lacking scales. It's got a thinner cauda peduncle and a complete lateral line. 4 central and 4 lateral pores in the supratemporal canal. The lower lip is thick with a deep median interruption and marked furrows and small median incision in the upper lip. Sitana attenboroughi is a new species of fan-throated lizard of the genus Sitana from coastal Kerala in southern India. The new species morphologically is closer to Sitana bissari, however differs in having higher numbers of ventral scales and a comparatively short but richly coloured dewlap. The specific epithet is a noun honouring the celebrated naturalist and broadcaster Sir David Attenborough for his contribution towards natural history documentation and wildlife conservation. A new species of armoured catfish in the Spectrocanthicus group has been found from the Rio Chaves Rio Agaia basin in Brazil. The new species is distinguished from its congeners by colour pattern, body dark grey to dark brown without dots or blotches. It can be further distinguished from S. immaculatus by having thicker and less numerous teeth, dorsal and caudal fins without curved spines and other osteological characters. Erythrocebus taxonomy has been dormant for almost a century now, with the consequent costs in our understanding of the biology of the genus and for the conservation of these remarkable monkeys. New data on the distribution and physical appearance of patas monkeys in Ethiopia, together with a review of the old taxonomic literature, allows us to resurrect Erythrocebus polyophius, which was first described in 1862, as a valid species that we now know is found along Blue Nile Valley at the extreme northeastern portion of the range of the genus. The still little known but certainly limited extent of the range of this species is a cause for conservation concern, but it may also be that this monkey could serve as a flagship species for conservation in the biologically rich western Ethiopian escarpment region and adjoining Sudan. Satanopercha scuripera is a new species of cichlid described in the Rio Madeira basin in the state of Rondônia in Brazil. It is distinguished from all congeners by the following combination of characters: 3 to 7 dark brown oblique stripes on the lacrymal and an irregular pattern of dark brown stripes on the cheek and opercular series. According to meristic and colour pattern characters, the new species is considered to be a member of the S. duripari species group and is syntopic with S. duripari, which is widespread in the Amazon basin. The restricted geographical range of the new species is congruent to that observed for some other Satanopercha species. I would like to also point out that whereas every effort has been made to contact the copyright holders of these photographs, we believe that we are justified in reproducing them in this not-for-profit video using the policy of fair use. However, if there is anybody who believes that their intellectual or legal rights have been infringed, please contact us and we will do our best to bring the matter to a mutually acceptable solution.
this?
And in next month's episode...
Rears? Not him, them.
And there's this.
Ever since we restarted this show back in the summer, we've been telling you how Louis was going to set up a Patreon campaign. Well, he's done it, and you can come see what he's done and hopefully support us in a very real way at this address. Thank you, guys. So, ladies and gentlemen, here we are at the end of another episode. As Karina said earlier, Charlotte's on the sick list at the moment. Poor girl had a cold that turned nasty and she's ill in bed. So we all send our love to her and hope she'll be back very soon in time for us to start filming next month's episode. I'd like to say a big thank you to everybody who's helped, particularly this month Carl Marshall, who's becoming more and more integral to what the CFZ does. Thanks, mate. We really appreciate all your hard work. And so, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, cats and dogs and the rest of you, until next month, you see.